Hello, everyone. My name is Sandy Delgado. I'm a meteorologist at the Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch, part of the National Hurricane Center here in Miami, Florida. And uh, this webinar is being recorded. So after it is done and processed, we will send it out to you in a few days. If you have any connectivity issues, please log out and log back in, and that should be resolved. And any questions that you have, please put them in the chat and we will go over them after Dr. Chris Landsea is done with his talk. So with further ado, let me present Dr. Chris Landsea. He's the TAFB branch chief, has been there since 2018. And Chris, you're good to go.
Great. Thank you very much, Sandy. So we're going to talk today about hurricane wind and wave forecasting for the Blue Water Mariners. Yesterday, you heard from my counterpart, Dan Brown, who was the hurricane branch chief at the National Hurricane Center. What we do in TAFB, Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch, to paraphrase our mission statement, we provide wind and wave predictions and issue wind-based warnings so that users over the tropical and subtropical oceans of the Gulf, the Caribbean, the West Atlantic, and East Pacific can protect themselves and their property. So I'm going to be doing a few kind of impromptu quizzes on here. So we're going to start with one. Who do you think our main customers are? Who uses our marine forecasts? So go ahead and just type in the chat. Sandy's going to be monitoring that, and we'll see if you got it right about who our main customers are. So Sandy, as you're seeing answers, go ahead and relay them to me. Go ahead and chat.
I see merchant mariners, commercial, coastal residents, commercial boaters, recreational sailors, communities, container vessels, small craft.
All right, great answers.
Everyone on their way at sea, weather forecasters, surfers.
All right, those are great answers. So it's the Mariners and the Mets. So I'm sorry, Sandy is a big baseball fan. Maybe it's not these Mariners and Mets, but you all are right. It's anywhere over the open ocean is using our products. So that's beyond 60 miles from the coast. We don't do coastal information, but the cruise liners, the cargo ships, oil tankers, the oil platforms, the U.S. Navy, and to a very large component, the U.S. Coast Guard, tourist boats, or anyone that's got a giant personal yacht. Those are our customers for the Mariners. So the Mets, on the other hand, are the Caribbean meteorologists. And so each country in the Caribbean has their own weather service. And we work with them as they take our big picture point of view and tailor it to their country for their citizens' needs. So yes, the Mariners and the Mets. We joked about putting the Pirates, but we don't want the Pirates using our forecasts. And as anyone who over the blue water knows, there are real world pirates out there, but we don't want them using it. So a little bit of background of why we provide the forecasts. Not only do we do it for the United States National Weather Service, but we also do our forecasts through the auspices of the International Maritime Organization. So the IMO was formed after the sinking of the Titanic early in the 20th century. And every square inch of the global ocean, that there is a country responsible for providing free wind and wave forecasts and issuing warnings. A little closer to home, the United States has its responsibility in the North Pacific as well as the North Atlantic. The Ocean Prediction Center does the high latitudes of both oceans. The forecaster is lucky enough to work in Honolulu, do the Central Pacific. Within 60 miles of the coast is the orange. Those are the coastal waters issued by the local weather forecast offices. And in green are the waters that we forecast for. So we have 10 million square nautical miles of ocean of the East Pacific, the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea, and the Western and Central Atlantic. Large area of responsibility, but we're very fortunate we've got some nice tools and technology to monitor it. Over that large area, as we're getting into hurricane season, the threat really depends on where you're at and what month you're in. The hurricane season does go from 1st of June to the end of November, but early on, June and July, there's not that much activity. Usually they're not very strong. What activity that does occur tends to be in the Gulf of Mexico or in the westernmost Atlantic. That's true for June and July. By late July, early August, the spread of where things could form moves eastward. And so you're getting systems forming in what we call the main development region. So that's south of 20 degrees north latitude. And the colors indicate where you're getting more frequent and more intense tropical storms and hurricanes. And at this point, you can see in August, everywhere north of about 10 degrees north latitude, west of about 25, 30 west, is at stake for getting impacted by a tropical storm or hurricane. September is usually the most active month, but even October can be very busy. The central Atlantic tends to shut down, but the Western Caribbean, Eastern Atlantic, West Atlantic tend to be very busy. And so November, it does come to a close, fortunately, in most years. But just 2 years ago, we did have a hurricane in November that hit Florida. So these 3 months, August, September, October, those comprise 90% of all the major hurricanes, the category 3s, 4s, and 5s. So those are the big 3 months you really got to pay attention to when you're out over the open ocean. So let me talk about some of the ways we observe winds and waves over the ocean and how we forecast them. So to make a prediction, you first have to start with what's going on now. And so we have a mix of in situ, that is measurements taken right at the ocean surface, as well as remote sensed information from satellites. So for example, that number 7 with a southeast wind in the southeast Gulf of Mexico, that's a National Data Buoy Center buoy. It's anchored to the ocean floor, gives us continuous wind, pressure, wave information. In this case, the wave is moving off toward the northwest. In addition to that, we have ships over the open ocean. And so the ships, we do get measurements from them as well. There's also drifting buoys that NOAA operates and has access to. To supplement that, we have information from space. So these numbers going across the Caribbean and the West Atlantic, those are an altimeter. So it's a radar in space that gives us wave heights, and they're accurate to the nearest foot. It's amazing. There's another radar in space called a scatterometer, and it provides wind speeds and directions in these swaths as it's spinning around the Earth many times a day. So between those are great tools for us. I did want to highlight how important it is for the voluntary observing ship program. So this is ways that we as forecasters get to know what's going on over the open ocean 24 hours a day. And so I would encourage companies that if you're not in the VOS program now, please sign up to be part of that. NOAA's been working more proactively to make it more automated. In the past, a captain or a mate had to type it in and radio the message out. Now we're going to a more automated approach where we can get your measurements. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to me and I can put you in touch with the VOS program manager. Another great tool for us in observing are the satellites. So because we are tropical meteorologists, we're examining the cloud formations. In particular, we're looking for thunderstorms that start to show a spin, because that's the first evidence that a system may become a tropical storm or a hurricane. And so we assist the hurricane specialists by providing what we call classifications every 6 hours of where a system is and what the peak winds are. And so that's a real important part. These satellites, they're called geostationary. They're launched by NASA. They're maintained by NOAA at a facility in Suitland, Maryland. It costs about $1 billion each. And they're paid for by tax dollars, but they're worth every penny, because without them, we would be blind to the marine impacts that could occur. Another set of tools are the computer models that we use. Because of the large domain, we don't use regional models, we use global weather models that gives us winds and waves across the entire globe. And so we tend to take a mix of different models to come up with the best solution, where the forecaster knows where there's some biases and weaknesses to different models, to blending them together. We do run one model locally. It's a wave model that's based on our wind grids. So once we have a 6-day forecast of winds that we like, then we run a wave model to get consistent wind waves and swell. And of course, swell are the large waves that can move all the way across the ocean, way away from where they're being generated. So an example of how we do this during hurricane season, it's a really wonderful and unique interaction between the hurricane specialists, our marine branch, and the local weather forecast offices. And so this is an example from Hurricane Ida, which was very impactful 3 years ago now. Hurricane specialists make a cone of the 5-day forecast, and an hour before it goes public, they send it internally to the Weather Service. And everybody's frantically running tools to incorporate that forecast into their wind and wave grids and other warning aspects. And so that pink star is about 24 hours in advance. And what we do is we're filling in the details. So those wind bars represent the wind speeds at 10 meters or 33 feet above the ocean surface. The colors represent significant wave heights, which is the average of the 1/3 largest waves. And that's typically what a mariner looking out over the water would estimate how big the waves are. And so we want to make sure it's consistent across the Weather Service. What you heard from Dan Brown yesterday, the hurricane products, we need to make sure what we're doing on the marine side is consistent. And so you don't want Dan's group to be saying it's going to be a category 4, but we're only saying 4 foot of seas. In this case, we were saying a lot more. For a category 4 Hurricane Ida, we were suggesting seas 30 to 35 feet, so about 10 to 11 meters. Lastly, our workstations are a critical part of the tool set that our forecasters have access to. We use what's called the Advanced Weather Interactive Processing System, where we get everything in there. We get the satellite data, we get the aircraft observations, we get the ship measurements, we get the buoys, we get the models in there, and we have a database of all of our forecast parameters, our winds, our waves, our warnings, our weather. And so we use that to then produce the products that we provide to you every day, 365 days a year. So let's take a look at some of these products, because if you're not familiar with them and you're going over the open ocean, I would suggest that you get access to these and refer to them regularly to make sure that you're staying out of harm's way. The first of which is a weather map, and it's called the Unified Surface Analysis. And it's a combined effort by 4 different groups. Our group here in Miami, the Tropical Analysis and Forecast Branch, the Honolulu Forecast Office for the Central Pacific, the Ocean Prediction Center for the high latitudes of the Atlantic and the Pacific, and then the Weather Prediction Center that does United States and Canada. Well, they don't do Florida. Apparently, Weather Prediction Center doesn't think Florida is part of the United States. After you've lived here a long time like I have, you're like, yeah, that's kind of true. Anyways, we put all this together and stitch it together to make sure it makes sense. And let's take a look at the map that was put together today by Mike Tikacek. And so you can see this is typical early summer where there's no tropical storms or hurricanes. You have a monsoon trough stretching across Central America, intertropical convergence zone off of South America, a weak low just north of the Greater Antilles, the Bermuda High, which is a bit south of its usual location right now, and then southeast return flow over the Gulf of Mexico. And then a weak cold front across the central Atlantic. Not very busy right now, no warnings in place, which is all very good news. So that's a first thing. Once we have that foundation of the weather map, then we can use that to help put together our forecast and put it in context of what are the impacts from the winds or the waves being forced by. Another aspect is our discussions. And so this is where you get to read hand-typed discussions by our forecasters, where they go into detail about what's going on now and what's going to happen over the next 5 days. So we do one product for the Pacific, one product for the Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf of Mexico. We'll just take a quick look today and see what Mr. Tikacek has done. So in this case, we're highlighting some, as a special feature, locally heavy rain over Hispaniola and in Cuba. We have a section talking about the tropical waves that we're monitoring, because tropical waves can become tropical storms and hurricanes. Now we break it up geographically, Gulf of Mexico, we talk about what's going on now, and then a paragraph about what's to come. And so this really gives you an insight into what's going on and what the forecasts are, and a little bit more about the why in the forecast, not just the what. The rest of our forecast information is predictions of winds and waves, including warnings. And we provide it in 3 different formats: traditional text formats, graphics, which are both radio facts as well as website based, and the grids themselves that one can access if you have a grid reader. So I'm going to go through a few of these and show a couple examples so that you can see what's available on these routinely. So one that is mandated by the International Maritime Organization, that's part of the Global Marine Distress and Safety System, is the high seas, which is a text forecast of what's going to happen. And it's for bigger events, 25 knots or greater, and seas at least 8 foot. We provide this 4 times a day for both basins. Something that's a little more user-friendly, also text, is our offshore zones. Each one of these little shapes in the Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean, and Western Atlantic, we have a 5-day forecast broken down into day-night intervals where we talk about the winds and the waves. If there's any warnings, we include that as well. This is the GUI that we have available. So let's assume you're going to go to the Flower Gardens National Marine Sanctuary off of the coast of Texas and Louisiana. So that would be this one right here. Looks really nice conditions if you're going to be scuba diving on that marine sanctuary right now. Seas 2 to 4 feet currently, really not changing much for the next few days there. So this to me is a really easy way to get an estimate, a prediction of the next 5 days of what's going to occur over the open ocean. We also provide the same for the Eastern Pacific offshore zones. So this goes from just south of San Diego, past Mexico, Central America, over to the Panama Canal, which of course is a huge entry point for vessels going from the Pacific to the Caribbean or vice versa, and then down to the equatorial waters over to the Galapagos. Again, it's 4 times a day. Any warnings are highlighted in there. So here's a question for you. There's a text product called NavText, and I'm just curious if anyone is using these. So this shows text information for the next 5 days, focused close to the U.S. marine ports that are in our area of responsibility. So if you use this product, please type yes. If you don't use it anymore, or used to use it but don't use it now, type no. I'm just curious if anyone in our audience is using this text forecast called NavText. It's transmitted by a medium range radio transmitter. Sandy, are you seeing any yeses?
Yeah, so far 3 yeses, 1 no.
All right, so there are a couple people still using. That's good to know.
It's
That this
very
still
rarely
has...
used. Deep sea commercial. Another no. Shows
All right.
up on our ECDIS.
ECDIS, yes, we'll get back to that. All right, thank you. Another one that I'm curious about. So there's a product called Vobra that we type it up, or it's automated typed up, and then the Coast Guard maintains a radio transmitter, and it's at a frequency that can be received hundreds of miles from the coast. And it's called Vobra, a high frequency voice broadcast. So it's like NOAA weather radio, but it's for use over the open ocean. Is there anybody in the audience that uses Vobra today? Anybody saying yes? Please type yes if you use Vobra.
So far 2 no's.
2 no's. I don't have, yeah. Yeah, the last I heard, there may be some sailboaters or cruisers that may still use it, but that audience apparently is diminishing. Any other yeses?
Nope. So
No
far
yeses.
4 no's.
That's kind of what I thought. All right, moving on. So getting graphical products, they're available both on our website as well as RadioFax. And again, RadioFax, it's provided by the U.S. Coast Guard at 3 different transmitters, and we're very appreciative over the partnership over the last few decades. So I'll show a couple of these products, again, both on RadioFax and our website. The first are surface progs. So these are the weather features for the next 3 days. And we have a 1-day forecast, a 2-day forecast, and a 3-day forecast. We provide these twice a day, and one set for the Atlantic and one set for the Pacific. So let's just take a look at what the marine forecaster provided. So this was I believe Amanda today making this forecast, and nice and quiet. A couple of tropical waves in the Caribbean, a weak front in the eastern part, a front going stationary and dissipating over Florida. Nice and quiet. We like it that way. It's not going to stay that way. All right, so that's surface progs. And of course, if there's any tropical storms or hurricanes, we're making sure that we're putting there on the graphic consistent with the official Hurricane Specialist Unit forecast from the National Hurricane Center. Another one is a sea state analysis. That is, what are the wave heights over the open ocean, and what is the direction that the dominant wave is coming from. So for example, in this case, the number 7 in the eastern side of this graph, they're coming from the northwest. So one thing we're looking to do with this graphic and other graphics is to change from feet to meters, because most of our mariners over the blue waters are international. And so we're going to be advertising soon for potentially changing over. We would not change near the coast. Everybody, including my brother, who's a small boater in Miami, they want feet. So we're not changing near the coast. But beyond 60 miles from the coast, we're going to see about changing from feet to meters for describing how large the waves are. Speaking of waves, we do a wind wave chart out again, day 1, day 2, day 3, comes right out of our gridded forecast, and it's provided twice a day. Let's take a look. It looks like Scott Stripling is our Atlantic forecaster today. Besides a 9-foot peak just north of Colombia, which is very, very common to have high winds and seas there, this is about as quiet as it gets. Only a 4-foot max in the Gulf of Mexico, the entire Gulf. So that's pretty quiet conditions. So thank you, Scott, for that quiet forecast. Another product that we provide, and it's colorized on our website, it's black and white, and RadioFax is the wave period and direction. So the colder colors are short period wind waves, generally reoccurring every 6 to 10 seconds. And the warmer colored ones are long period swell that are 15 to 20 seconds between wave crests for waves that are moving all the way across the ocean. So those are some of the key ones that we provide in our marine branch. I did want to say a little bit about the tropical weather outlook. Dan talked about it, but again, we're incorporating this information into our forecast as well. So there's the 2-day tropical weather outlook, where any disturbances that are present now are with an X and color coded on chance of forming in the next 2 days. And it's supplemented by a 7-day graphical tropical weather outlook of where these systems may form. And so when we get systems in the red, we may proactively issue a gale warning if it looks like it's going to develop into a tropical cyclone. So that's something that we're taking this information and doing some value added forecasts by going proactively to a gale warning for some of these high risk systems that are in the outlook. So did want to talk about cone, because to me, this is such an important product. Dan talked about it a little yesterday, but I think it's important enough to reiterate. What does the cone mean? All right, so again, you get to vote. All right, so that's a 5-day forecast, shows up with those dots. It also shows where the land-based watches and warnings are on the coast in the red, pink, blue, and yellow. But what does the cone exactly mean? And so you got 3 options. Does the cone mean it's the likely area of strong winds, either tropical storm or hurricane? It's the likely location of the center of the storm. That's option 2. Or option number 3, it's the likely area of strong winds, extreme rain, large waves, and or life-threatening storm surge. So all of the hazards put together. So you have to vote if you want. Vote 1, likely area of strong winds. Number 2, likely area of the center of the storm. Or number 3, likely area of strong winds, extreme rain, waves, and storm surge. So go ahead and vote now, 1, 2, or 3, and we'll see who's right. Sandy, are votes coming in?
Yes, Chris. I see many threes, a few twos, and one.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, number 3s, you're wrong. The cone only tells you with itself where the likely location of the center of the storm is. And in fact, the center stays in there only 2/3 of the time. About 33% of the time, the center jumps outside of the cone on occasion. And so the cone does not tell you where the winds are. It does not tell you where the rain is or the storm surge or the waves. So that's why we have other products to provide that. So it used to be that mariners were taught to use the 1, 2, 3 rule, where they would use the TCM, the Tropical Cyclone Marine Text product that's part of the Global Marine Distress and Safety System, plot it up on a map, draw this shape around the forecast chart for the next 3 days. It was called the 1, 2, 3 rule. It probably took 15, 20 minutes to do this. I can happily say now for the Atlantic, Caribbean, Gulf, and East Pacific, you don't need to. So mariners, if you're taught the 1, 2, 3 rule, you don't have to use that anymore. We're doing it for you. And it turns out we're using more nuanced information. We're using what's called wind speed probabilities or chance of gale force winds. And for the non-mariners, gale is the same as tropical storm force. So 34 knots or 39 miles an hour. Every time we issue a forecast, there's a 1,000-member Monte Carlo simulation, a mathematical approach that gives you 1,000 plausible little hurricanes, all with plausible tracks, sizes, and peak winds. And so what we do, we count up how often different wind thresholds are met, either 34 knots, 50 knots, or 64 knots hurricane force, so that we can have chance of tropical storm winds or chance of hurricane winds. And so this is really important because if you want to know, am I going to get hit by the storm or is it going to miss me? The problem is whenever we do a 5-day forecast, newsflash, it's always wrong, okay? Sometimes it's wrong by a lot. Most of the time it's have smaller errors, but they all have errors in them. There's always uncertainty. So to take that uncertainty into account, that's why we're providing chance of winds through these wind speed probabilities. So let's say you were a captain of the port in the Coast Guard in Boston. You had to decide, am I going to put this port in restriction or am I going to close the port? Because they typically close the port when you have sustained onshore tropical storm force winds. In this case, from Hurricane Bill, Boston had a 40% chance of sustained tropical storm force winds. So what do? Do you close the port, put restrictions, or don't do anything? Not our call, but we're helping provide that nuanced information to the Coast Guard and other folks. And so for you as a mariner, this is a product that's, again, website and radio facts called the Tropical Cyclone Danger Graphic, where we use 2 thresholds of chance of tropical storm force winds and make a cone-like graphic out of it. And so you can see the dark hatching on this is where it's a 50% chance or more of tropical storm winds over the next 3 days. So if you're doing your ship routing, you're trying to avoid the worst of the conditions, and you just want to know where is it most likely to be tropical storm winds, then you want to stay out of that hatched area. However, let's assume you're more risk averse. Let's assume that instead of a big oil tanker, you're a cruise ship. And unlike an oil tanker, the cargo on a cruise ship tweets, and you don't want your cargo tweeting bad things. So you want to be very risk averse, and you'd say, all right, we're going to stay out of the 5% chance. So that's reasonable worst case. Stay out of that, and you're not going to get tropical storm winds for the next 3 days. So this really is, I think, a wonderful tool for nuanced information about where you're going to have your ship and dealing with that accordingly. So one way we're trying to help mariners is provide our gridded information in a real easy way to access it. And so on the right side, it shows winds at the ocean surface. The colors represent the significant wave heights, with reds being 20 to 30 feet waves. And this is for Hurricane Earl as it left the Greater Antilles and is heading toward Bermuda. And so we're providing this information. On the left side, it's a graphical representation of the high seas text forecast that frankly not a lot of people read anymore. But to me, if I'm going on a cargo ship, say from Jacksonville to Puerto Rico, I would want to be staying out of these tropical storm forests, maybe even the strong breeze conditions to avoid the worst weather. And I could decide that in just a few minutes in taking a look at this. So again, let's take a quick peek of what's available today on this. So our this website goes right to this GUI, and let's look at 10-meter wind barbs. Let's look at wave heights, and we can start showing in meters or feet. We'll put up feet. And then overlaid on that, you can show the forecaster derived features and the weather map. So this shows again from Mr. Ticket Check's weather map this morning, what we just saw earlier. And the blue color represents really low seas right now, less than 6 feet everywhere. So we can take a look for tomorrow morning. So this would be Friday morning. We can look at Saturday morning. And again, it's showing a progression in time of the winds and the seas and the features that are causing them. And it goes all the way out through 3 days with the forecaster features. And then it goes to days 4 and 5, where we have winds and seas, but we're not providing features. But all the way out for the next 5 days looks wonderful. I wish I could be on a cruise right now. All right, so that's a real quick overview. Again, you go to hurricanes.gov/marine. You can get all these products, hurricanes.gov/marine. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the marine disasters that have occurred during hurricanes. And it used to be, a century ago, every year there would be ships sunk in hurricanes. We're more fortunate now because of the technology and the forecasting improvements and the communication that there's much less of that. However, there still have been recent marine disasters of ships sinking in hurricanes, including the 4 listed here. The picture shows the El Faro, which was a U.S. flagged cargo ship going from Jacksonville to San Juan and back every week. The captain took this ship right into the center of Hurricane Joaquin when it was a Category 4 hurricane. And unfortunately, the vessel took on water and sank with all 33 souls on board. Very sad occurrence when that occurred. The voice recording was recovered from the bow of the ship, and the National Transportation Safety Board and the U.S. Coast Guard did post-event reports to uncover that while the forecasts were not perfect, and they never are, and the initial forecasts for Joaquin were not very good, they improved substantially over time. But the captain was kind of anchored on that first forecast, where he thought he could just stay north of the Bahamas instead of deviating to the old Bahamas channel and avoiding the worst of the hurricane. What was worse, that shoreside, the company was not paying attention to what the captain was doing. Fortunately, things have improved, and I think the chances for this are less likely. But in all of these hurricane marine disasters, it's human error, and it's bad decision making and putting lives at risk because ships are not invulnerable. So that's a very sad when that happens. It's good though that this happens very rarely now, and we can actually see this. And for those that have been on this webinar before, I believe I've shown this, but it's worth showing again. If you go to marinetraffic.com, it shows all the vessels that have their satellite transponders turned on, so that if they get into trouble, the local Coast Guard can come and help them. And in this case, they actually color coded. Red are oil tankers, green are cargo ships, orange are fishing vessels, Light blue are tugs and special craft working the oil platforms. Dark blue are the cruise boats, and purple are giant personal yachts. And as Hurricane Delta came off the Mexico Yucatan coast, we could see the ships moving out of the way. Now, I don't know if they're using our forecasts or a private ship router, but regardless, it's gratifying to see vessels, people taking the right actions and getting out of harm's way. Now, I don't think I would have wanted to be on one of these oil tankers just offshore Galveston. I would have been personally a little further away. But 98, 99% of all the vessels out there, and there's hundreds of them, as you can see, they did the right thing by paying attention and changing what they're doing to stay out of the worst of the heavy weather conditions. In this case, Hurricane Delta hit a fairly unpopulated Louisiana, and very quickly, marine commerce and the ports got back to normal after the work by the Coast Guard and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and NOAA to inspect the ports, make sure the aids to navigation were in place, make sure the channels were not blocked. And that's really important work that happens after a hurricane. So I've mentioned the Coast Guard a couple times, and you may not know, but there's a special relationship between the United States Coast Guard and the United States National Weather Service. And it's because the Coast Guard has exactly 0 forecasters. Now, the US Navy has a bunch of forecasters, the Air Force, the Marine Corps has forecasters, but not the Coast Guard. And that's by design. So every 10 years, there's a real high-level memorandum of agreement signed between a Rear Admiral in the Coast Guard and the Director of the National Weather Service, where Coast Guard will help us by providing radio fax and Navtex transmitters and the VOBR transmitters, as well as some of the NOAA weather radios in Alaska. And we will provide them forecast and briefing support in support of their life-saving mission. So we've recently put together a concept of operations where we're trying to flesh this out a bit more. And it turns out that our role at a national center, at the National Hurricane Center, we work with the districts. So the Coast Guard districts. It's the local weather forecast offices that work with the Coast Guard sectors, stations, air stations. And so because it's a nice delineation of duties where we provide more big picture information and the local weather forecast offices provide more nuanced local decision support for the Coast Guard. So what we've been doing are 2 main aspects, one of which are the spot weather forecasts. And so each of those little flags shows where we provided a spot forecast in support of the US Coast Guard. Actually, a few was actually for the French Navy near the Eastern Caribbean as well. And it could be for a disabled ship. It could be for an aircraft that's ditched. It could be law enforcement activities where they're chasing the bad guys because there may be people trying to bring drugs to the United States. It could be a boatload of migrants trying to reach the U.S. and you know, very haphazard vessels that may sink. Or it could be a man overboard, which is fairly common, where they're trying to locate and rescue the person. And did you know that it's almost always a man overboard? 85% of the time, when it's a man overboard, it's really a man overboard, not a woman. I'm not sure what we're doing wrong, guys. My guess is that it's still a majority of the people working on vessels and oil platforms, especially the working ones, carrying cargo are men. But it could be that men do a lot of stupid things and get into trouble. Regardless, it's amazing the efforts that the U.S. Coast Guard does to rescue people when they're missing. Well, there's another aspect to our decision support services, and that's during hurricane season. When there's a threat of either a hurricane anywhere in our marine waters that overlap the district's search and rescue region, or if there's a tropical storm or hurricane threat to the U.S. coastline, we provide briefings. Last year, we provided 26 of these briefings. It wasn't overly active last year. In 2020, in contrast, we provided 88 live briefings. And so we'll see how active it is and how much we need to help them. They're using these to do a lot of their decision support. They have to decide for their offices, which are mainly on the coast, do they board up and evacuate the Coast Guard office, or do they stay in place to try to help residents out? They also have to get their cutters and fixed wing aircraft and vessels out of the way of the hurricane, but not too far away in case they've got to go rescue people afterwards. And after 2022 Hurricane Ian, they ended up rescuing 1,007 people from Southwest Florida. 1,007 people. Amazing. And then lastly, and I mentioned this earlier on the wind speed probabilities, the Coast Guard has responsibility for the major ports in the United States. And so the captain of the port at the sector has to decide which ports to close and when a hurricane. We don't do any of that. That's not our role, but we work with the Coast Guard closely to help them with those really tough decisions. And you can see at the bottom a nice thank you from Captain Hortensio from U.S. Coast Guard District 7 here in Miami. A couple last things before I finish up. First, we do want to encourage companies to join the Weather Ready Nation Ambassador, or it could be organizations. This is a way for us to reach out to you to let you know about the latest that's going on the marine side. And so you can see there the website. It's weather.gov/WRN, or Weather Ready Nation Ambassador. Did want to highlight our social media as well. As folks get more internet accessibility over the open ocean, we want to make sure we keep up with that. So as an example, anytime that there is a warning, we tweet it out. It goes out over X to folks that are signed up for that service. Another thing we do twice a week, every Sunday afternoon, every Thursday afternoon, we do a short YouTube video. We post it on our YouTube site for the National Hurricane Center. And it's a 5-day briefing for the Atlantic, Caribbean, and Gulf of what are the weather impacts. And so if you'd like to sign up to this, let me know and I'll add you to our email list. One other resource is a updated Mariners Tropical Cyclone Guide that was put together by Lieutenant Dylan Flynn in the Navy Reserve that used to work for us at the Hurricane Center. He's now at Weather Forecast Office, Monterey, California. Wonderful publication that goes into details globally, not just in the Atlantic, but globally on products and services available and best ways to avoid tropical storms and hurricanes and typhoons. So that's available free of charge from that website. Last couple before I finish up then. So we are trying to get more of our forecasters to get more familiarization with ocean-going vessels. And being on a cruise ship, I don't know if that really counts because they do their best to keep any waves away. So we've been getting our forecasters aboard both NOAA ships, like Stephen Conorick last summer, and Eric Christensen, who got aboard the U.S. Coast Guard training ship, the Eagle, to work with both Coast Guard cadets and NOAA Corps officers. So the last thing I'm going to wrap up with is that, the recognition that communications are changing really fast, especially over the open ocean. Just a couple decades ago, the only way you could get information was by radio technology, so radio fax. And that's been great, and we thank the Coast Guard for providing that. But we realize that things are changing really fast, especially with SpaceX launching all of these mini satellites for Starlink, where now folks can get high-speed internet anywhere over the face of the earth pretty reliably. And so now people are going to websites like windy.com because they've got some beautiful graphics and animation. A limitation of that, though, is that that's not showing the official forecast. It's not showing our forecaster added wind and wave grids, and it's not consistent with the official hurricane forecast. And so our ultimate goal, our holy grail, is to get our gridded information of winds and waves and starting to design warning polygons, basically a no-go zone that mariners can put on their electronic charting systems, so their ECDIS that Sandy had mentioned before. So this will become voluntary in 2026, coming up soon, and any new system starting in 2029 is going to be mandatory. And so to me, that's going to be wonderful to have not just our wind and wave information and warning polygons, but also bathymetric information by other parts of NOAA, currents information as well. And so this is going to be a tremendous improvement to information the mariners can access all in one workstation. So I think I'm going to stop there. Again, anytime you want marine forecast information over the open ocean, you've got that website there, or just simply hurricanes.gov/marine. So on behalf of the 17 forecasters in the Tropical Analysis and Forecast branch, I hope this has been helpful for you as you get ready for the hurricane season over the open ocean. And please be safe. And Sandy, if there's time, I might take a question or two if there's any out there.
Definitely. Just going first with a comment, like Chris Fogarty saying that in Canada, the Coast Guard services the weather service met buoys. That's interesting. One question that when you were talking about the satellite data that we use, one question that came up was the satellite data surface or a 500?
Right. So the data we get from the scatterometers are surface winds. Basically, the radar beam is bouncing off the ocean, and depending on the direction of the wave, it can figure out the wind speed and and roughly the wind direction as well. So there are other satellites that can get information about different levels in the atmosphere. So for example, you can do cloud track winds from the geostationary satellites. Basically, every minute where you can follow a cloud, you can get a wind vector from that. And so there are ways to get mid-level winds from satellites as well.
Excellent. And we're also looking into other, so we have other satellites that provide data, but they're new, so still being tested. How accurate the information is. So that could also become available over the next few years for our forecast. If you have any other questions, please put them in the chat and we will answer them. Another question, Chris, is with the advent of computer modeling, is the 500 millibar chart used much anymore?
Well, I could ask that of you guys. Certainly, as meteorologists, we use 500 millibar chart a lot because it's, for example, it's a great proxy of direction that a tropical storm or hurricane may take by looking at the winds and the heights at 500 millibars. So here's a question back to everybody online. Does any mariner out there use 500 millibar height information or wind information? Is there anybody saying yes?
I got one yes. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, that's not going
Yes.
away. Yeah, the 500 millibar information is provided both by radio fax and the website by the Ocean Prediction Center. And it really is a way, if you have some meteorological knowledge, to understand why are the winds at the surface doing what they are, because a lot of it is driven by the mid-level flow of the atmosphere. So that's not going to go away. If you're using that, you can keep using that. I would applaud you. You don't have to use that though to make a surface forecast. You know, we're providing the surface forecast, but it may be a good sanity check as well as a bit of the why to the what that we're providing.
Definitely. Well, I don't see any more questions. So thank you very much, Chris. Thank you to everyone that participated. And I will get this presentation, process and send to you over the next few days. So thank you so much and have a great day.